All right, we're a minute after the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Again, welcome and thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. Before I kick it off to your presenters, I'd like to just review a couple quick items. This webinar is being recorded, so if you need to leave at any point, feel free. We will be emailing a link to the recording within 24 hours of this webinar concluding. You can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask the presenters questions. We'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout the session and trying to get to as many questions as we can. If we're unable to address your question live, if we run out of time, or if it's very specific to your particular search, feel free to reach out to your placement associate after the webinar, and we'll do our best to make sure we get to as many questions as we can. And all attendees are muted and without video throughout this presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to kick it off to our presenters.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, everybody. My name is Liam Gluck. I am the music placement associate at Carney Sandoe. I've been doing music for the last 5 years, and I've been working at Carney Sandoe for 6. Prior to my stint at Carney, I was teaching music. I taught at an Episcopal school in Texas for 2 years and then did some summer programs at Loomis Chaffee, a boarding school in Connecticut. And you can see my Yamaha stage piano behind me. This is where I get some practicing done when I'm not working. So that's me.
I didn't know you worked at Loomis, Liam.
Yeah.
Learn something new on these webinars. I'm DZ. I have been here for this is my 6th year. I came straight from the independent school world where I taught at a boarding school here in Massachusetts for 10 years. I taught middle school math and then coached and helped with theater. And in my outside life, I worked with a theater group locally. I did tech theater, backstage stuff. I do art in the background. Julie pointed out that all my Christmas tree ornaments I made myself, but that's my level of art that I have right here. And yeah, just excited to kind of work with everyone and kind of get to know what everyone's looking for and how we can help you. So Liam, you want to start off with anything else?
Yeah,
or?
So we'll just sort of walk you through what this presentation is going to look like. It's essentially an onboarding conversation where we'll talk about the current market and our predictions for this hiring year based on how this last hiring year went. And obviously, like everything else that affected COVID-19 certainly affected our hiring year this year. So we can walk you through what that looked like and what we might expect from schools moving forward. Then we'll talk about what schools are looking for from a job seeker, from a teacher candidate. Ways you can make your profile shine, ways to stand out in an interview, and also COVID-19 year related skills and or qualities that schools are going to ask you about. And then we'll talk about how the hiring process and timeline has changed, what it typically is, and then again, minor tweaks to it based on this pandemic. We'll then discuss our conferences, which are going to be all virtual this year. For those who aren't familiar, our conferences are in-person hiring events, sort of like speed dating events between schools and teacher candidates for their open positions. We usually do them in hotel ballrooms throughout the country, but this year they're going to be virtual. So we'll talk about how those are going to work. And then we'll just cover best practices in working with us, how to connect with your placement associate, how to, basically how to keep us in the loop as to what's going on. And then thank you for a few of you who've submitted questions as part of your registration. We'll try to tackle a few of those. And as Julie said, we'll be monitoring the Q&A chat throughout this webinar, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can.
So first up is trends and predictions on what's going on. Obviously, 2020 has been a year like no other in terms of hiring and in terms of everything. So it has been a quieter fall for us, and the summer was pretty busy as schools got going, as they knew what they were going to start to do with the virtual learning. But it's been a pretty quiet start, and we expect that to happen. As schools kind of figure out what they're looking for the coming year. As we hit the spring and as potential vaccines and everything starts rolling out, how that will affect, and schools get to know what their teaching will look like, if it's going to be virtual or in person or that type of thing. They're going to start knowing that more towards the spring and in the summer. So we expect that the the year will kind of be pushed a little bit more towards the spring and summer as the schools learn a little bit more about what their upcoming year is going to look like. Again, this is all our best guess and what we're seeing kind of in the marketplace right now. There's nothing written in stone, unfortunately. I wish we could know exactly what was going to happen, but we can't. Obviously, things that are different this year, hiring is virtual. Most of you have used Zoom as much more than you have in the past 10 years, but it's a lot of the lessons are being done online. Some schools are taking the lessons out, some schools are continuing. And what those lessons look like vary by school. Some schools are having you jump right in and teach a lesson to students, and others are having you do it to administrators. So every school is a little different, and it'll be important that you kind of touch base with the school and get to know what their expectations are. Are they looking, one of the things that we have heard is that while they're not always looking for exact content, they're looking for how you interact with the students, your flexibility, your ability to adapt to a situation. Obviously, you don't want to be spitting off information that's inaccurate, but a lot of the information that they're looking for from you is going to be about your interactions with students and kind of the content itself, both. They're looking right now, it's still kind of those mid-year hires that looking for January starts, as some folks are doing early retirements or kind of mid-year relocations, that type of thing. So it's going to be an interesting year. And again, we're thinking kind of later in the season is when we'll be seeing some movement. Liam, anything to add there?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, well done. I think just to sort of encapsulate what Dizzy was talking about, how we can't necessarily know when hiring is going to tick up. I think that's because schools don't necessarily know when hiring is going to tick up, because none of us really know, when a majority of their particular region or population is going to be vaccinated. And that's really what it comes down to. While in typical hiring seasons, independent schools tend to hire 6 to 8 months out. So, now through June would typically be the busiest time of year for hiring for the next fall. What we've seen schools do lately is just sort of react to the ongoing, situation in public health. So in what were typically our 3 busiest months of the season, March, April, and May of this year, so last spring, when obviously COVID-19 hit the US, we saw a huge slowdown in business. We were like, 9 out of 10 jobs that would usually get listed with us just didn't happen, didn't really appear with us. And then as DZ was referenced, there was an uptick of hiring over the summer as schools sort of figured out a tentative reentry plan for the fall. And then there was a flurry of last minute hiring just with all of the different logistical and personal and family and teachers union even concerns when it came to teaching in person versus teaching hybrid, versus people who had agreed to teach hybrid, but then their kids' school went remote, so they had to stay home. And so that school had to scramble to find somebody in person. So schools have basically just been reacting to, all of the wrenches thrown their way, which is why we can't necessarily predict, what's going to happen. But it seems now as though there are a flurry of mid-year opportunities, not necessarily in the arts, unfortunately, or at least not in music. I don't want to speak for DZ, but across the board, we're seeing a lot of mid-year opportunities, more than we typically do. I think just as people assess their comfort level with teaching in person, or, if people do end up moving midway through the school year, or if there was something like a maternity leave or paternity leave that got extended, or whatever it is. So we're expecting more of a reactive rather than a proactive hiring year this year, which I think could mean that, late spring and summer could be pretty busy this year as we return to normalcy, basically. So yeah, from our current markets and trends, we'll move on to what schools might be looking for, particularly in this year of the pandemic. So DZ already touched on this, but virtual skills are going to be huge. And obviously for anything demonstrative or performative, that's especially hard to teach over Zoom. And I've heard from a lot of you on some of you are doing some really creative, really admirable work, whether it's socially distanced rehearsals in outdoor spaces, if you're, below the Mason-Dixon line and it's still nice out, to recording individual SATB parts, for a choir rehearsal, and then piecing them together with some sort of music software. Schools are going to be very curious about how you adjusted your program to be online, because, for visual arts, and then especially for drama and for music, I'm sure those adjustments were huge. So, what software programs did you discover? What challenges did you find with sort of, corralling a group to rehearse in person, or, how did your practice of music theory change, that sort of thing? So schools are going to want to ask you questions for sure about, how this year went, and what you did to sort of mitigate, the challenges that you faced. So in that discussion, they're going to want to see if you were able to adapt, if you were flexible. And I think it's probably important to say that schools aren't necessarily looking for the answer of like, oh, it was seamless and it was perfect and I'm fine and I'm not stressed out and I haven't had burnout this year. Just because that I think, I mean, unless you're a superhero, would be inauthentic. I mean, this year was horrible for teachers, frankly, and especially performing arts teachers, just because, a lot of programs were decimated or a lot of kids had to drop out of arts electives to cover something else in remote school. So be honest. I mean, certainly be professional and be constructive, but I think speaking freely about the challenges you faced and what you were able to overcome and maybe what still isn't perfect but you're hoping might return to your program next fall would be great. It's sort of that idea of perhaps the same idea that teachers are trying to instill in their students, but the idea of resiliency, right? That not everything went according to plan this year. Obviously, that's an understatement. And, everybody's dealing with a different level of emotional and personal stress based on your own health or the health of others around you, or, whether you know anybody who's succumbed to this illness or whatever it is. People have lost their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think schools will want an authentic answer and just some demonstration as to how you've been flexible this year and how you've tried to adapt or how you've been able to adapt to the virtual teaching mode. Another thing that they'll definitely ask you is a lot of scenario-based questions, which typically like an on-school campus visit would mitigate. So for those of you who are new to this process, typically, it's phone or Zoom or Skype with whoever's leading the search. That'll be your first round interview. And then you might have a second round interview with the department. So, you might meet the music chair in your first conversation, then the rest of the department in your second conversation. And then if you're a finalist, you're brought to campus where you teach a demo lesson and they get to see you in front of students and how you interact with them. And you prepare some sort of lesson that's maybe in sync with their curriculum, maybe it's not. And, you sort of get a feel of the places, they get a feel for you and your teaching style and just sort of your ethos. That obviously is impossible in most regions of the country right now. We are hearing of a few schools that are managing in-person campus visits as long as the school and the candidate are comfortable. But I think the majority of your finalist visits through late spring will probably be virtual. So in lieu of a teaching demonstration, you may do something virtually, but you also may be asked a bunch of scenario-based questions. So your band, all of a sudden it was deemed unsafe. You couldn't rehearse because, any aerophone instrument was deemed unsafe for COVID. How did you manage that? How did you supplement instrumental instruction? Or, how did you keep the attention of students in your music theory class on Zoom? Say you had a kid who was acting out or a kid who was in crisis with something with COVID, like a parent's in the hospital or something, how did you handle that? So I would say just being prepared to have these scenarios, vaguely mapped out in your head and be able to answer to some of the possibilities that they might pitch to you.
And we had a question come up in the chat that maybe I can toss to you now and see what you think. Are there any recommendations you have for people who are just starting out and might not have the same level of experience teaching in a normal classroom setting?
Yeah. So for music, I don't recognize your name, Samantha, so I'm sorry, but I'll speak for my music candidates, and DZ, perhaps you can answer for arts and, visual arts and drama. Any sort of music work that you've done. So whether that's college work, high school ensemble work, I don't know how old you are, but I'm assuming you're either in the midst or have completed an undergraduate degree related to your field. What kind of ensemble experience or medium experience, if you're a visual artist, or performance experience you've done in and outside of school? That's all very relevant because for private schools, for independent schools, their programs are usually demonstrative. Unless it's an IB school, they get sort of into the theory of music and the musicology, the sort of history of music. But mostly it's like, can you lead a group to sing? Can you lead a group to play? Can you lead a group to perform? So any sort of playing or performing or just like doing experience that you have, I would try to highlight on your resume. And then any sort of informal, or not even informal, that's the wrong word, but like unofficial teaching and kid experience. So if you were a camp counselor, or if you used to ref youth sports, or if you were even a lifeguard over your summers, like in high school, that's relevant, because that's working with kids and families in a community setting. And that's sort of half of the job, I would say, of being a teacher in one of these very close knit, smaller, certainly independent schools. So I hope that helps answer. Dizzy, do you have anything to add?
No, I think it's exactly the same thing. Content level expertise and experience with kids. Those are going to be the two things that schools are looking for. Obviously, every teacher at some point didn't have any teaching experience. It's true for even the teachers with 30 years of experience right now. At one point, they didn't. So when schools acknowledge that, and their schools are looking to build a balanced faculty as much as they want to have racial, socioeconomic, cultural, all the different types of diversity, age diversity, diversity in age and experience is something that's really important to faculties as to staffs as well, because they are every teacher. I had this piece of advice from one of my teachers in my first year, and I was saying I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed and thinking that I wasn't going to be able to contribute something. And she's like, DZ, every teacher brings something different to the table, and you're going to connect with, and everyone has a different skill set. So you younger teachers in their career are going to be able to connect with students in a different way. They're going to bring in new ideas and new content. And so just making sure that you're communicating your expertise and what you bring to the table is going to be important, no matter what stage you're at your career. Some people have a history in Egyptian art, and that's a really cool elective that a school couldn't offer if you weren't there, So everyone has something that they can bring to a school that no one else can. So just making sure that what makes you unique, what your subject area expertise is, and your experience with kids would be I would say the advice I would give.
The other big thing that schools are going to be looking for, and again, this is sort of in response to the national climate especially, but it's been sort of an international reckoning, but is the idea of racial justice or racial inequity in the United States, and how independent schools, historically as places of privilege, if not outright exclusion, culturally, economically, socioeconomically, are gonna handle that moving forward. And so, being familiar with the school's DEI mission and just Office of Diversity and Inclusion, like what kind of efforts they're doing, I think will help you in an interview. And also just sort of building up or strengthening your own skill set or your own palette of knowledge, I guess you could say, on what you're going to draw to make your classroom more inclusive, to introduce marginalized voices. So, if you're a music teacher, are you performing? Are you talking about music that just wasn't written by, older white male classical composers? What are you doing to kind of diversify like the learning that takes place in your classroom? So, kids maybe without formal music instruction, but have some sort of informal musical knowledge. How are you going to bring that into your classroom? So I'd say being able to speak books that you've read, or blog posts that you've read, or speakers that you've listened to, or just efforts that you've undertaken to kind of advance your own diversity and inclusion mission within your classroom or within your teaching practice. And obviously everybody's in a different place with all of this, including, the people at Carney Sandoe all come at this from different sort of levels of knowledge and understanding. But as a firm, I think, Dizzy, you can agree that we're very much trying to be a resource for these DEI efforts. And so if you're curious, if you are looking to bone up on your practice or looking to just start, you can head to our puzzle blog, or you just basically go to our website and then you click diversity inclusion and you'll be directed to the resources that we've compiled. But we're happy to partner with education leaders and thought leaders in this space that could offer some insight on what you could do.
Yeah, I would second that, definitely. A lot of one teacher I was just speaking with recently, they started an Artist of the Month club, and they're focusing on underrepresented communities to make sure that they're exposing their students to, again, not only kind of the historically famous paintings and kind of those older white males in the industry, but making sure that they see people of color, women, everything. So that was a really cool idea, when you're selecting your plays and you're selecting your musicals, making sure that your writers and directors are people who come from underrepresented communities in the arts. These are all things that schools are going to love to hear, because that's what they're looking to do for the most part. and having experience in that, or at least the desire to partake and be in an environment like that will very likely come up and be important to the schools that we're working with. That is definitely something that when we speak to most schools, kind of that DEI lens is something that is at the forefront for every one of them. Liam, how are you doing with what schools are looking for? Are you good there? Should I move on to the files and what to go for from there?
Sorry about that. Almost got interrupted by my roommates who happen to be my parents. Welcome to COVID times. Just answering a question on the Zoom. Sorry, DZ, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was saying, do you want me to move on to the file and referrals? Are we good there? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what's next? Like, so now you're a registered candidate. Where do you go from here? Building your file is going to be the most important thing. And the most important thing about this is you should think of this as a professional dossier. It's a place where you can come back to for your entire career. So even if you're not searching for a job in 2 years and you have a really cool piece that you want to add to your portfolio, you can log in and add it so that you have a place for all of your professional documents. It'll have your resume, your personal statement, letters of recommendation, and you can load everything in. And you can make some visible to schools, some not visible to schools. So even if you have certain letters at certain times that you want to highlight, depending on the jobs that you're looking for, then that is fabulous. And you can just put them right in. Obviously, the most important of the documents is your resume. There is going to be no job search if you don't have a resume. You know, your placement associate, Liam and I are happy to look at those and make sure that they are up to date and formatted in a way that will be really applicable to schools. I would recommend not using a professional resume service. I don't know what you think, Liam, but I know that a lot of those, the resume services are built and geared towards either public schools or businesses. And I find that the independent school world is really unique in what they're looking for. They want as clean cut a resume as you can get. Information about your contact at the top, education, and then work experience is what they're looking for the most part. So we're happy to look at those things with you and go over that briefly. We're not going to go like fine tooth comb with you, but just making sure that everything is kind of where it should be. And any suggestions or questions, we're happy to add. I love how during this webinar that like the light from my window is dimming. So now I'm just like dramatic theater lighting is happening right now with no background. You know, I'm really getting into my subject area. So resume, yes, most important. Personal statement and cover letters, next up. Those are the next two. Now, we often get questions, do I need both? What are they? What's the difference? Some people want to think of a personal statement as a generic cover letter. I would suggest not doing that. A resume is a very factual rundown of what you've done in your career. Whereas a personal statement, if a resume is what you've taught, a personal statement is how you've taught it. What are your ideas on education, like an educational philosophy, or why is teaching important to you? Why are the arts important to you? Music, theater, you know, whatever it might be. Why is that important? If you have an experience with a student that really speaks to you, you know, I have this one experience where I saw the number 4 once. I know this is going to sound absolutely insane, but I had always made my 4s kind of like the open topped 4. And then I saw this beautiful 4 and I was like, wow, I really want to write my 4s like that. So I started switching between my 4s. And I actually had a student say to me once, Zito, are you transitioning between 4s? And in that moment, I knew how closely students were observing everything that I did, right? Like if they noticed I walked past a piece of trash on the quad and didn't pick it up. So that was a really impactful moment for me that I often speak to when it was so small and so minute when I was switching between 4s, which is an asinine thing to do in the first place. And I acknowledge that. But, you know, those are the things that you can speak to in personal statements and your philosophy of how that changed me as an educator. That's really important to communicate. You're looking for your next family. They're looking for their next family member. Are you the crazy Aunt Sally? Are you the serious Uncle Bob? Who are you? And that can come across in your personal statement. You know, that is a place where you can give them more information, more color about you while still remaining professional. I think that's the really important balance to find in a personal statement. And it shouldn't change. Your educational philosophy should not change from school to school. Who you are as an educator, it should be core to you. And that is a fixed thing, not fixed. I hate to say that because it can evolve over time. All of us are changing educators, right? Whereas a cover letter should change from school to school. It should highlight the connections between their position description and what you bring to the table. I was an admissions candidate back when I was a candidate with Carney Sandoe. And I talked to my experience as a tour guide, in college. I spoke to my experience about being on the welcoming committee at my school. These are all welcoming things that are really parallel to what you do in admissions. I spoke to the different experiences I had that would speak to that position. That all went in the cover letter, along with information about the school. I, of course, reviewed the website and put information that I was drawn to about their school. So getting those 3 documents, those are the 3 most important. And definitely the resume is first and foremost. In terms of what will happen next, you might talk to your placement associate, or you might not, but we'll start sending you information as they start coming through. Again, if you're not hearing from us right now, it could just be that there are no positions out there to send to you. So it doesn't mean you're off our radar. You're going to be on our radar. We might just not have anything to show you at the moment. But when we do, there's 2 different ways we could send your information to a school. If it's a no-brainer, we know you're going to want that job, we're going to send it to you. We're going to just send your information, and we're going to get it to the school as quickly as possible so that they have access to your information. Hiring can move very quickly, particularly as we get to the spring and the summer. And then if we're less certain if you'd like a position, perhaps it's at a 1-year position. And even though you're moving to the Boston area and the job's in Boston, you might not be interested in a 1-year position, or it might be on the edge of Connecticut and you're moving to Boston and we're not sure if you'd want it. We might ask you first. So in that scenario, what is critically important is that you let us know yes or no. Some people feel badly about declining a position. They think that's going to put them on some sort of blacklist that we're not going to refer you again. It is not. I can assure you that we were happy to work with you all of the time and send you what we can. It is literally what we do for a living. So we are excited to do that. But the most important thing is that you say yes or no either way. If you say yes, awesome. We'll immediately send your information off. And if you say no, you can tell us why it's a no. Not looking for 1-year positions. Geographically, that's just a little too far. I'm not interested in working in a religious school. I'm not interested in lower school positions. You might have a reason, and we can use that information as feedback for us as we move forward in sending you new positions. We might still mess up from time to time. We are in fact human. There's no algorithm that does this finding for us. So we might miss that message, but we would rather know yes or no. Leaving it unchecked is not the more polite decline. We'd rather have the decline and know, so that we can know you better. And if you confirm something that we ask you about, we then know, like, oh, cool, she's interested in that one, or he's interested in that one. They might know this. They might also be interested in this school as well. And we might have a few more to send you if you're interested in that one. So just being communicative with us is really one of the most important things. We'll speak to that later about working with us best, but good communication is really important. We're not always able to hop on the phone all of the time. Email is going to be the primary source of dialogue mostly. It's good to get on the phone when we can, but a lot of it can be triaged via email, and it'll be more expedient that way. And that in, particularly again, spring and summer, expediency is paramount. So making sure that your portfolio is built, it's robust. Again, thinking of it as a long-term thing. We have worked with folks who, from intern to head of school positions, we have tracked them through their career. Obviously, Liam and I haven't been here only 6 years, but our colleagues who have been here for a long time have done that. So thinking of it as a lifelong thing, a career-long thing, and then making sure it's as robust as possible. And the interaction with the referrals is really as thorough as it can be. I would say those kind of the most important things about that.
Yeah, I would just add one more thing about a resume or personal statement, and potentially a cover letter too that you're writing to these schools. So the first would be the difference between a personal statement and a cover letter. We get this question a lot, and they do sound similar. The personal statement, while a very sort of personal, it can be anecdotal or colorful, as DZ was saying, just the way to express like you and weave sort of your narrative of teaching and why you love to teach, or just your story essentially to a school. That's going to be sent to every single school that we refer you to. So you can think of it almost like a personal essay for a grad school application or something, like just what's something about you that you can't necessarily glean from your resume. Whereas a cover letter, if a school asks you for a cover letter, they're going to want something specific. And of course, there's going to be some boilerplate language in there, like I am very pleased to apply for XYZ school. Make sure you get XYZ school right. You'd be surprised the number of times there's the wrong name of the school in there. but try to do some research into their program and talk about or argue why you'd be a good fit for them. They want to know if you're interested in their particular program in their particular place. Just because independent schools are sort of built around their own identity, their own kind of deal. Like every school has its own mission statement. Every school caters to a different subsect of students and families, and parents select that school versus school B down the road for particular reasons. So as much as you can figure out, what's the reputation of the school, what programs are really strong there, what do they look for, how do they try to develop and inspire their students, that'll help you, and that'll advance you further than if you just send something that's pretty general. So on a resume and personal statement too, particularly if you're a professional or working artist, I think a lot of these schools, it's sort of a balance between stoking their ego. Like if you have something where you're like, you were the first violinist in the Miami New World Symphony, or, your oil paintings were just on exhibit at the Met or something, or, you wrote an off-Broadway play, definitely put that on your resume, because that's something that, schools will be impressed by. But I wouldn't necessarily lean on those accomplishments to get you in the door of a teaching job. What's going to be as important, if not more important, is your experience instructing, whether that's kids or adults of any age, and why you want to teach. So if you have both, you'll knock it out of the park. And if you don't have crazy professional accolades, that's okay too. If you do have professional accolades, I would say certainly reference them. But I wouldn't bank on you being a highly successful recording artist as getting a job at, Philip Sandover, for example. So we'll move on, I guess, to the process. So we've talked a little about your documents and your file. So, what the timeline of a job search might look like. And unfortunately, even in a non-COVID year, that's pretty difficult to pin down. Schools have openings and list openings with us all of the time, many of which don't actually materialize. Maybe it's a sort of soft search because they've heard whispers and rumors that their current music teacher is looking, but then that person decides to stay. And in other cases, maybe it is a hard and fast, this person's taking a medical leave, this person's getting fired, this person is retiring. So we definitely have this opening. But so, I wouldn't be surprised if a school reaches out to you 48 hours after you submit your materials and they want to try to interview you within a week. And I also wouldn't be surprised if something sits for months and all of a sudden you get a call from a head of school like 3 months later and you assume that job was closed. But they're like, oh no, it was a tentative opening or it was a confidential listing, but now it's public. Now we're definitely going on it. We had a benefactor kick in. Our brand new art center is going to be built for next year. So that was on hold for a while. So you never really know like what the impetus is behind their search. And so, I think being flexible in terms of timeline or just managing expectations around, like some schools will get back to you right away and some schools won't. If I had to pick an average, and DC, maybe you can concur, I'm not quite sure, but like 2 to 3 weeks, I think would be between submission of cover letter and first phone interview when the school reach out to you.
I would say that it depends on the time of year, like if you're in the spring, I'm not sure, if it's in the winter, I once saw something over Christmas break or holiday break, and then came back and applied at the beginning of January. Didn't hear back until middle of the spring, April 16th, because I had just turned in my contract on April 15th. So I had to go to my school and ask for an extension to go apply on April 16th and reply. Versus if they're posting it in May, it'll be it will probably be very quick. So I think more so than average, I think, yes, kind of in the normal timeline of things, it'll be a couple of weeks. Also depends on, is it grading and exam time? Where are they in their school process? So I think Liam's right. It's really tough to pinpoint even not in a COVID year, but it also has a lot to do with what's going on in the school at that time and kind of just the time. If there's less going on in the school and it's, there's more time to hire, if it's just November or December, it might be months, or it could be weeks. But yeah.
Thank you.
I have one other thing that I just forgot, but I'll pipe in a second.
Sure. The other thing would be too that arts, particularly music, tends to happen later in the hiring year than a core subject. So like English, math, science teachers tend to be hired January, February, March, April, whereas music teachers, in my experience, the most active months are May and June, and even July can see some activity. So I would suspect that jobs will start to pop up later in the hiring year than earlier in the hiring year.
That's what I was going to add, is that there's actually almost kind of different hiring seasons. My areas at Carney Sandoe happen to be theater and visual arts and physics. So a really dichotomous couple of areas, and the hiring season for my physics candidates is now and into early January. And that has a lot to do with just a smaller candidate pool. There are less physics majors graduating each year from college than there are English or humanities or arts. And even within that smaller group, folks can go into industry and make twice as much money, if not 3 or 4 times as much money. So the candidate pool is just so small that they have to focus. It's not that they value those teachers less. It has nothing to do with not valuing the arts. I've had folks ask me that in the past. It's nothing about how the schools view the arts or value them. It's actually a very small math problem that there aren't as many candidates. So they have to take care of those candidates before they're all hired and gone. So that is the timeline is very different. So you might have friends of yours at a school, that if you're in a school right now, who are a science or a math or a STEM candidate, who might be getting a lot of emails from their placement associate. Don't take into account, and you're not hearing from Liam or I regularly. Don't take that personally. Again, it's just a lot of different hiring timelines. I've had emails before that say, oh, my friend so-and-so is getting a lot of emails from their associate and I'm not hearing as much from you. Something going on, something wrong with my portfolio. No, it's a lot about timeline and kind of what schools are having to focus on just as a necessity, as opposed to a priority.
In terms of process too, so we sort of described the normal process and how COVID's upended that, but you can expect, if you're going from first round interview to like finalist, I would say 3, 4, 5 conversations with the same and or different groups of students, teachers, and administrators, most of which will be happening virtually this year. And we're happy to answer questions for you along the way, or if you're looking for a little bit of inside information on a school, or if you're trying to decide between 2 offers, or you're wondering, you're given a contract, it turns out, you are the finalist, you are their pick, and maybe you want some salary history from that school, we can offer you such numbers anonymously, of course, but we're happy to sort of hold your hand through this process. So don't think that we ship a referral out and then we're sort of done with you. If you want to come back to us with questions on, even when it comes to advice for a finalist visit and, or, which job should I take? Or, I have this offer in hand, but I'm waiting to hear back from this school. How do I handle that conversation? We can help you navigate those discussions because we're in touch with the hiring contacts as well. So we're sort of a liaison between, the 2 parties when it comes to communication and process. So feel free to reach out to us throughout the job search, if that would be helpful.
A couple of questions that have popped up. Any particular advice for who or what we should be looking for our letters of recommendation? Hi, Chris, I'm DZ. We've spoken on the phone. I also just shot you an email today, so be on the lookout, which is great that we can talk like this. Yeah, great question. And I should have talked about that when building your portfolio. Things that are important, and this is going to tie to Angela's question as well. Letters from your supervisors, of course, people who know your teaching and your work or your artistry, those are, or have seen you and can speak to your professional work or your work in industry as well. Those people who know that would be great people to write the letter. So your division head, your head of school, if they're in touch with you and they've observed your work, or maybe they could speak more holistically, if you work in the theater or in the dorms or, athletics, someone who can speak to kind of all of those parts, especially if you have different roles. I had someone who spoke, who taught in the English department or the humanities department and the theater department. So having your 2 department heads speak would be a wonderful idea. Letters, Angela, your question is about board of, I'm sorry. It's actually Carla's question about, a member of the board. If you have someone who can speak to your work or your contributions to the school that is a board member, great. That would be a great person to have. You could also have them on your reference list as well. Other folks would be peers. You could have a peer, someone in your department who knows your work. That's another person. Things that are not as effective, anything that's more than 5 years old. Schools don't give as much credence to letters that are over 5 years old. Student recommendations, not great. And what else? Parent recommendations or grandparents, you know, you've tutored a student or something like that, not so much. And those aren't as impactful. And anything self-authored is also not necessarily viewed with any credence, because we could write whatever we want about ourselves, really. So it's a letter of recommendation from someone else. So basically, your contemporaries and superiors, or anyone in industry who knows your work and can speak to your work ethic or your efficiency and abilities in that area. Board members are great. Having them reach out on behalf of you is wonderful. Those personal connections are definitely one of the best, if not the best way of getting jobs these days. We are a great conduit. If you don't have someone who's a direct connection to a school, that's what we offer as a service, of getting to know you and being that conduit. So that would be something to keep in mind as well. My school does not write letters of recommendation.
Oh, sorry, DZ. I just typed that answer out. Yeah, but the answer.
Great. I was like, it just disappeared. I don't know.
The answer, that's fine. A lot of international schools especially do not write letters of recommendation, just because the international school circuit sees people job hop every 2 to 3 years, just sort of the nature of, you know, traveling the world through teaching. So as long as you can get references that are current, you know, people from your most recent school or schools who can be called, you know, contacted for a reference, that's fine.
If you're in industry right now, in theater or music or art, and you haven't had that much teaching experience, folks who would be ideal for letters of recommendation are anyone at a gallery that you've worked with who can speak to your work. Those who have not only done that, or if you've worked with students or kids at a summer program or a camp or anything like that, and your supervisor's there, they would be great people. But really, it should be people who can speak to your work or work ethic. That would be the best people for that. In terms of informing your school, there's a question that's been hanging out for a little bit from Michelle about informing your school. That's difficult for us to recommend, because the school culture around such discussions varies so much. You know, and that's tough for us to gauge. I think it's important that you are honest and open with them. If you're ever going on site at another school, once you're at that stage, you can remain confidential in the initial stages, a phone call, you know, a first round interview. But if you're ever going for an on-site or a finalist interview, and one of the reasons we recommend this is you never want them to call your school and have it be a surprise. You know, they might start checking references right before your finalist interview. And if you haven't been honest with your school, that is going to be an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of folks involved. No school wants to feel like they're poaching someone else's teacher, and no school wants to feel like they're kind of blindsided by their employees. So definitely, at least by the time that you're at the finalist interview, we recommend having those conversations. But again, you know, some schools are a little more supportive. I went on a school visit once in Oklahoma, and the assistant head of school was like, before we talk about my hiring needs, I want to introduce you to 2 of my faculty members who are looking to leave, just to give you some time to get to know them. That is a supportive culture right there. That is not something that happens in every school. And there are other schools that find that a little threatening that someone's looking to leave. And it depends on why you're looking to leave. If you're looking to relocate to a different part of the country to be closer to family, that's a very understandable conversation to have with the school. You know, every school's contact is a human, so they know that they'd want to be with family too. You know, if your spouse or partner is relocating, you know, that's a very understandable thing. If you're just unhappy at the school and you could potentially take a job right down the street, that is going to be a different tenor. There's going to be a different tenor to that conversation. So I think it really depends on a lot of factors, and maybe speaking to faculty members who've been at your school for a while and have seen this type of conversation happen with other colleagues would be a great starting point in terms of assessing how to best approach that conversation with your head of school. I don't know what you'd say, Liam, but that's probably where I would recommend.
Awesome. Yeah, so I guess we can move on to conferences.
Yep. Okay. So conferences, some of you may have been to our conferences in the past if you have worked with us. I am going to pull up the dates. I have them all right here. The big difference between our conferences in the past and this year is they are virtual. They will not be in person. So those room full of tables and mints on the table and, you know, coffee off to the side, that's maybe and hopefully the upcoming year, but not this year. Everything is virtual. We're going to have 4 We're going to have the diversity conference, which has always been in January. And I don't even have to pull them up. Julie has them right there for us. I had forgotten about this slide. So it is from the 27th to the 29th, plus 2 weeks of DEI professional development. That is going to be one of our larger ones. It tends to be one of our larger ones. It is not only for candidates of color. It is for folks who consider themselves allies and who want to kind of go deeper into that community, or even if you're just looking to hire. The professional development and the hiring are separate parts. So you can sign up and be part of it. The winter forum is going to be what would be generally thought of as our Boston one, but we don't know if the schools will come in the same amount because it might be a tougher time of year. Some might be on a winter break or something like that. So that's open to everyone. STEM and innovation. If you're a STEAM instructor, it might be applicable to you, and there's going to be professional development on that front as well, and it might be of interest. But that might not be as applicable because it's going to be a focused event for hiring STEM educators. And the same, kind of a general hiring conference for the spring, which again, might be one of the busier ones for the arts candidates. So it doesn't hurt. You can sign up for one or as many as you'd like, and we'd be happy to help. One of the things that I would forewarn is that the earlier ones don't tend to have as many arts positions always, and maybe Liam can speak to this a little bit more. I would want to set the expectation that even if you do register, I wouldn't expect a day full of interviews. That is not realistic. It could be that you get 0, 1, 2, 3 interviews, and that's a good day, especially at the earlier conferences, because again, they're going to be focusing on those STEM needs and kind of that are more the tighter candidate pools. So I just would want to make sure what you could do to combat that, so you're not putting aside 2 full days and kind of and having that kind of overtake your life for 2 days, is you can set a couple of hours that you're not teaching. If you know you're not teaching from 1 to 3 on January 27th, then make that blocked free, and then block off some of the rest of your day. Give the school some time to times that work for you so that you are in control of your own schedule, but being mindful that the number of interviews will vary. And it'll also vary if a colleague of yours in the arts is looking and they're looking with a nationwide search, and you might be looking to stay in Northern California, the number of opportunities for you is going to be more limited, obviously, than someone who's doing a nationwide search. So being realistic kind of about that, kind of the number of opportunities that would be open as well is also something that I would recommend. You are going to have the schools are going to have access to your file, so you don't need to have anything special or do anything ahead of time. You'll notice that the schools are going to identify which mode they are going to be contacting you through, whether it be FaceTime or less FaceTime. Oh my gosh, Zoom,
Teams, or Google Hangouts,
Google Hangouts, whatever it might be, just a phone call. It might just be a phone, Skype. But what we do recommend is making sure you have Zoom, which obviously do as we're here right now, having a Skype account, and making sure you're accessible in as many different ways as you possibly can be, so that you're ready for whatever mode that the school throws at you. So doing that is a little bit of homework for you, and it's really good proactive work to get ready for the conferences. Schools are going to be interested in seeing portfolios from their art teachers and their music teachers. One of the things, a question that came up before is how do we combat privacy issues? That's something to discuss with schools. If you're in a school setting, you might not be in a school setting, but I'll speak to the school setting. If you're in a school setting, you're going to have to talk to your school because there might be privacy issues. Liam might have more. He's been working in the arts a little longer than I have, so he might have some recommendations on that front. So I'll toss it to Liam about ways to work with schools about privacy issues when filming classrooms.
Yeah, truthfully, it hasn't come up that much. It's just sort of been on a school by school basis. And I think typically as long as you get the permission of your school, you're fine. So just make sure you're running it by your department chair, your administrator, that you're going to, use this footage of a chorus concert or performance in the park or whatever it was for your materials. And I think for that recording to have been made in most cases, you would have had to have gained authorization from parents or from the school. So typically you're fine. Like if the recording already exists, you're totally fine. It's more a matter of if you're making a new recording, or you have this performance coming up and you want to film it, you may need to submit a form to the families and just say, you're comfortable with your child being recorded and all that. And typically, which is kind of funny, it's never usually a problem. The one market where it can be really a big problem is LA. As you can imagine, a lot of famous people's kids, just they don't want them out and about on the internet or on a video. So if you're familiar with Viewpoint School in Calabasas, they're pretty notorious. Brentwood's also pretty notorious for like, don't film my kid, because like Shaq's kids go there, or Matt Damon's kids go there, and they don't feel comfortable with that. So that's sort of the one glaring exception. But if you're not teaching in a LA independent school, you're probably okay, I would say. So we will now, I think, move on to
just two quick things that I think would be helpful, just kind of questions that have popped up that are applicable right here. How should a teaching couple approach these forums if one is an art specialist but the other is not? One is not an art specialist but the other is. The nice thing about these forums is they're open and they're going to be hiring for a lot. Again, they're virtual, so you're not going to be flying anywhere. There's no need to get like plane tickets or hotel reservations. The nice thing is that even if schools aren't hiring right now, one of the benefits of registering for these conferences is that they're going to have access to your information for basically the entire hiring season. So if they register for the winter one in February and they're not looking for an arts candidate, they're going to be able to go back in May when they are looking for an arts candidate and access the resumes that were there, so they can filter through those as a resource for them. So it's actually great exposure, even if you are registered and don't have contact right away. In terms of the couple, sign up for as many or as few as you'd like. You're going to have different interview schedules that the schools will be contacting you. Different schools will be contacting you. What will happen is if you're in our system marked as a couple, we will link your profile so that when we send out your full dossier, your spouses or partners, like executive summary, let's say. So we're going to send your personal statement, your resume, your transcripts, whatever you've given to us, we're going to send that along with, and we also create like a one-page executive summary that we put on top. What will happen is when we send your information out, we'll send your spouse or partner's top sheet only. We won't send their entire dossier. We'll just take your entire dossier, put their top sheet on top, and send that off. So the school will know that you are together. And that will happen even in the hiring conferences. So if a school is looking at your information, they're going to see your partner's information right in there, just that one-page summary. And that will be something that you can bring up in the conversation as well. Is it considered? Yep, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, Jason, hi, how are you? I've been working with you for a few years. Sorry, DZ. Yeah, your question, is it considered impolite to suggest times for interviews? Not necessarily, no. And actually within the conference module, you can also set your availability. So from like 8:30 till 4:30 Eastern Standard Time, or whatever the interview slots are. If you're available around the lunch hour or like at the end of the day, you can set any of those half-an-hour time slots to available or not available. So schools will be able to see your availability off the bat. But if your schedule changes or if the school's schedule changes, just get in touch with each other and you can figure something out. And actually, one of the advantages to these conferences being remote is that even if they don't get to you that day, it's not as though you booked this flight or booked a hotel room and you moved yourself to the specific location. They're going to hold on to your information and they'll be able to log back into the conference module, and maybe they'll email you the next week and say, hey, we're very interested in you for a theater job. Sorry, we got caught up with we just really had to interview a bunch of English candidates because that's like our number one search right now. But we're definitely looking for a theater person and we'd love to connect with you. Sorry, we couldn't do so on the day of the conference, but are you available this week? We saw that happen a few times last year, so you can definitely hold up for something like that.
And quickly, Chris, yes, production photos and videos are helpful for theater candidates. Okay, you want to move on to the next stage?
Yeah,
I'm just mindful of the time. We have like 5 minutes left, so I don't want to kind of keep people too long. We promised an hour, so my
Sure.
fault.
Yeah. So working with us, I think the one key to working with us is just communicate with us. The worst thing you can do as a candidate is just go radio silent. So we've been referring you to jobs and just jobs are trying to get in touch with you, but you took a job in a public school 8 months ago and just never bothered to, inactivate your file or get in touch with us. That makes everybody look bad. The school then yells at us, you don't know what you're doing with your candidates. And it's like, well, we do. We've been trying to get in touch with them. But so just be responsive, I think, is all we basically ask. Respond to our emails. We'll do our best to respond to your communications in a timely way. Feel free to provide feedback on your referrals. As DZ said, it's not impolite to decline a referral. We prefer that. We prefer notes. We prefer you logging in and rating the job and letting us know, why you're interested, why you're not, when you sent your cover letter, whether they're in touch with you for a phone interview. So yeah, feel free to just be in touch with us, I think is the best way that you can communicate with us and work with us. So moving on, I guess, to some of the questions that were asked ahead of time. And again, we'll try to answer these as quick as we can. Recent graduates or younger candidates with minimal teaching experience, I would say definitely look out for teaching internships or teaching fellowships. These tend to be less common in the arts than in core subjects like English or math, but they're certainly out there. And I think we sort of covered this when we were talking about any and all kid or coaching or instructional experience that you've done. If you used to coach a dance team in high school, if you used to lifeguard, if you used to be a camp counselor, that's all relevant experience for somebody who's out of college and, without professional experience of any kind. Next one, talking about COVID gaps in a resume. I think schools are going to be very understanding of such gaps. As the numbers of unemployment just continue to skyrocket, it would totally make sense that a musician, a live performing musician would be among those people. I mean, gigs have pretty much dried up nationally. No one's really listening to live music right now, or hosting. Hopefully they're not hosting, big parties or weddings where you would get some work. So, I mean, that's completely understandable. I think as long as you talk about it professionally, and as long as the gap wasn't caused by, some sort of professional failure on your part in your last job, you'd be fine, and it won't be looked at poorly. What to do if you're an older job seeker? That's an interesting question, right? I mean, because we can't necessarily screen our schools for age discrimination. Is it out there? Certainly. I think it sort of rears its head as more of an expensive issue. Like if you've got 20 to 25 years of experience, and so you want to make $85K minimum. Are there schools out there that are going to hire you? Absolutely, because they value your experience and they can. Are there schools out there that want to hire the 24-year-old person for $42,000 or $38,000 a year? Yeah, that's reality for sure. But what I always encourage older job seekers to do is just be honest. Keep your dates on your resume. I wouldn't remove them. That removing them highlights it's a red flag. I mean, it sort of makes an issue out of the maybe non-issue that is your age. And be honest with us in terms of salary. Like if you say, yeah, I'm at the end of my career, but I mean, I just love to teach and I'm okay. I'm pretty comfortable financially. We can make that known to the school when we're referring you. And that's also something that you are welcome to discuss in an interview or in a cover letter. So that would be my answer. And DZ, do you want to take a crack at the last one?
Okay.
I can too if you don't have time.
I'm answering questions on the. I'm trying to get us done as we are answering both.
I didn't want to mansplain. I don't want to take over. Sorry.
I can do this one. I'm typing an answer currently to Matt. If one's teaching experience is mostly in person, are there any tips or pitfalls that you would consider most important to look out for when teaching virtually? Just for the sake of expediency, I would refer you to our puzzle blog. There's a lot of virtual teaching resources there. Julie, who's been sitting silently, you heard from the beginning, has really built this incredible resource on our puzzle blog. Where you would go on our website, CarneySandoe.com, where you go to log into CandidateConnect, just to the left of it is something that says the puzzle blog, and that's how you can find it. And it's a searchable resource board for job candidates, and you can just do virtual teaching as in the keywords filter and things will come up. What about arts candidates who are looking to move into administrative roles was a question that we got. Great question. That's difficult. My first 3 years at Carney Sandoe, I worked in administrative placements and placed assistant head of schools, heads of schools, division heads, academic deans of students, that type of thing. And I will say in the marketplace, it tends to be that schools will hire, particularly externally, candidates who come from the math, English, science, or history fields, where their background is from that. The typical trajectory for, let's just say a division head, is to go from teacher to department head to academic dean to division head. You could also go the student life role and end up in a division head role as well, and then from division head, assistant head, head of school. But the typical trajectory is teacher, department chair, academic administrator, and then academic dean, division head. So what that means is schools are looking for folks who have dealt with parents on a regular basis. And not to say that arts teachers haven't, but it tends to be that schools will hire from those four. On the other hand, schools will, if you are in a school and you're interested in an administrative position, I highly recommend that you talk to your school about that goal, because people's first administrative role mostly comes from an internal promotion. So if you, as an arts teacher, are moved up to an academic dean role in your school, that shows in school A, let's say that you're working at currently, that shows school B that they trusted you and put you in that role. So I would very much encourage you to talk to your school or your administrators about your professional goals, and they can help you kind of on your trajectory, which will then be able to kind of move over. Very rarely do people move up and over in one swoop to a new position and a new school. That's a tough one, particularly from an arts or physical education background. It is more likely to happen for an academic person from the 4 academic courses that schools are viewing. I personally don't necessarily, I think arts is an academic subject, so that is a discussion for a different day. But I would say talk to your school about moving up through into an administrative positions, because that shows trust. When I was looking to leave my school and work in administration, I made sure that I communicated that. They moved me into admissions. I got an administrative role. I toured kind of the region to kind of speak on the school's behalf. And that showed schools that my school trusted me to do that, and that was worthwhile. So I would say that. Otherwise, we are at the 5:02 mark. So I know that there are a couple of more questions that, quickly, last year, Carney Sandoe was not able to find me a job because of COVID. I'm sure I'm not the only case. Will I get priority this year? That's not necessarily how we work. What we do is we send a group of resumes to a school, and they're the folks who make the decisions on hiring. So we are going to promote your candidacy as much as we would have last year, as long as the positions are there for us to send you to, and that you meet the qualifications of what the school is looking for. We're going to send every candidate who meets the qualifications, and we're going to send you to as many jobs as we can, because our goal is to get you a job. And so we're going to do that as much as we can. And then it's up to the school who they ultimately interview. Public school experience versus independent school experience, that differs by school. Some schools think it's identical, and some really have a preference to have some independent school experience. That does not mean, however, that they're not going to hire someone who comes from the public school. Teaching is teaching, kids are kids. There are some things that you're going to encounter in independent schools that you don't encounter in public schools, and vice versa. So some schools are a little bit more, prone to that. Yeah, I think that is most of them.
Yeah. Feel free to get in touch with us after the fact. If you have any follow-up questions, we'll be happy to answer them personally. And of course, we're here from you as we're here for you, I should say, as we continue this strange hiring year. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and good luck to you, and enjoy the holiday season. And I hope you and yours remain safe and remain healthy and in good spirits. And let's cross our fingers for an early vaccination. Yeah. So.
I can go turn on some lights in my apartment now, which would be lovely. So have a good holiday. If you
celebrate. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching.